Okay, so as I'm sure you can notice, Reforged 0.9 has been released, and with it there's a few more units that I can show. There's not huge amounts like there was in the last video, but there are still some. So we'll go through them, and then we'll have a little talk about what's going to be coming up in the next few days and weeks with regards to this mod. So let's have a look at some of the new things first of all though. So to start off with, Dale have been given a few new units in the latest version, and to start off with, well, they're all basically the same, kind of mid-tier units overall, just to give Dale a little bit more depth. Starting off with the Dalian Spearman again, just a basic spear unit. All of them have this same basic look, the sort of the red. Another unit they've been given are the Dalian Marksmen, which again is a bow unit. Again, they're a mid-tier archer unit, so they'll do decent amounts of damage. They're not anything too special, but they will still get the job done against more basic units, especially if you put them around the General's Bodyguard like the Dragon Slayers or the Royal Guard. They'll do a pretty good job for you. They also carry axes on their sides. It's nice. And finally we have the Dalian Cavalry, which again, Dale's Cav was a little bit on the light side, so it's good to have another unit. They are essentially, I believe they have slightly more defense than, or is it the other way around? It might be that the 8th Wodia Horse Guards got slightly more defense. And these guys, they've got basically the same sort of charge, but yeah, I think the Horse Guards are slightly better, but it does give them another option here on horseback nonetheless. And Dale are not really going to win any cav battles against any of the really cav-focused factions, but they will still at least be able to block enemy cav with stuff like this, and they won't fold immediately, so that's nice. So just a few new units for Dale, and again, I think Dale are the ones who've been given the most new units since release, just because there are 3 of them. Most of them, if they've got given anything, have been given like 1 or 2 at most. So we'll move on to another faction that's been given something new. So this is a new unit for Mordor, and it is technically a unit that was in the game before, because it is the Melkor's Chosen, but they were taken out for a little while, and now they've been put back in, and they are rather different, as you can see. Very, very scary looking, and they are essentially an anti-cav unit. They're essentially just super wargs, as I'm sure you can tell. But again, the Melkor's Chosen are basically the kings of the wargs. I don't even think these are wargs actually, there's something else. But nonetheless, this is another unit for Mordor, and if you're going for a slightly more mounted focused Mordor, it will be expensive. But if you build them around this unit, you will be able to munch through enemy cav. Stuff like Khand and Rohan, they're not going to be liking going up against something like this. So yeah, that's Mordor's new unit, and they only have 1, so we'll move swiftly on. So Harad have been given 1 new unit since 0.9 was finalised, and that is the mounted Ashari. Ashari of all kinds are basically high damage with a little bit less survivability, and this is going to be no real exception. They do a lot of damage off the missiles, but you have to be careful with them. If they get engaged in melee by enemy cav, they will start to drop pretty quickly. But this is another interesting addition to Harad, because it gives them another fast way of getting around the battlefield and trying to whittle down the enemy, which you will need to do because Harad's infantry corps not as strong as quite a lot of other factions, especially now that Umbar have left them. And honestly, I still think Harad could do with a little bit more based on what I'm seeing. Like, I haven't actually played them in many real senses yet. I've only just messed around with them in free mode against the AI, but I would suggest in player versus player encounters, Harad are going to struggle a bit, because the Mumakil are the only unit that they have that is really exceptional, and that can be easily dealt with by javelins and the like. This, however, is a potentially very good unit if you're able to micro it correctly, simply because of the damage you can deal with it. You've got to be careful with them though, because they are pretty expensive, and wasting them is easy, because if they get caught in melee they will start to drop very quickly, especially against some of the heavier cav can be fielded by the likes of Dol Amroth and Rohan. So that is Harad. We'll move on now to some other new stuff. Rune have also been given something new, and that is the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen. Now, there isn't much to say about them. They are essentially a much better version of the Balchoth Tribesmen. They are a javelin unit that deals a lot of damage, of course. They also have hit points, which is an interesting little bit. There's also the Blue Wizard over here, which is pretty cool. Is that the general? I don't know if the Blue Wizard counts as the general, or if that gold swordsman does, but that's pretty cool nonetheless. Strong unit, obviously. Javelins are going to be more important, I feel, in 0.9 than they were, simply because of the damage they deal, now that the archers have been somewhat scaled back, so that they're a little bit more focused on range as opposed to just being good all round. So the javelins are going to be important, and this is a very, very good javelin unit, similar to the Demons of the Desert of Mordor, or what formerly known as the Trollman javelins. They have hit points, they do a lot of damage, they're going to be difficult to get off the battlefield. Really, it's going to be a case of a cav charge is going to wipe these guys out pretty quickly. But I also feel as though ranged fire will still take its toll in the long run, because the hit points aren't the be-all and end-all, of course, but it still definitely helps. A very good looking unit as well. I like the fact that they've got a nice curved sword there. Arnor have also been given something new, and that is the Arnorian Peacekeepers. They are basically a spear variant of the Arthur Dane Men-at-Arms, so a pretty good sort of higher mid-tier spear unit, and this is interesting because it gives Arnor a lot of options with regards to this sort of thing. Remember, back in Vanilla when they didn't have a spear unit at all apart from their militia, now they have plentiful options when it comes to setting up a good defense with polearms. Very good all-round faction now, Arnor. These guys add to that a little bit because having no mid-tier spears is still a bit of a gap that they had. Now that they have them though, it's easy for them to plug gaps in their defense, chase off cavalry, that sort of thing. A good addition, I feel, but there isn't much to say about them, of course. They're just spears. But yeah, Arnor have always got that nice armor, nice survivability. Not quite as tough as the dwarves, but you know, as near as you can get with the Kingdoms of Men, I suppose. So now we'll move on to the new stuff for the new factions. Not only have Umbar been buffed to the extent that was needed, I believe, but they have also been given some new things, including the Balagir halberds. So I've noticed that halberds tend to be pretty damn good all round now, so having a halberd unit like this is very useful for a faction. I do like the mean look of this halberd as well, the hook, so again, it's nice to have. They're not overly expensive, they aren't the best halberd, they certainly aren't the worst either. Gives them a nice option with regards to sieges in particular, where halberds are very strong, or even on a field battle where they want to have something a little bit more survivable than their pikes, maybe against a faction that isn't so cav heavy. A good option to have nonetheless. And then we have the Harbingers of Castamere, a dual sword variant of Castamere's Chosen, which have now been buffed themselves. Very similar to the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, I believe, in terms of how they're meant to function. Dual swords, lots of damage, so that's a bit of a theme for Umbar. Lots of damage, maybe not quite as survivable as another infantry-focused faction, but provided you get favourable engagements, you're going to cut through enemies very, very quickly. So the Harbingers of Castamere are really in line with that philosophy. They're not going to survive very long against sustained arrow fire and a lot of pressure from a lot of high-tier infantry. But provided they're up against favourable opponents, without too much in the way of skirmish fire raining down on them, they will do a lot of damage indeed. 3 hit points as well, so they will last longer than you would expect in melee, provided they aren't being overwhelmed. So that is Umbar's new units. We'll move on to a few other new things, but we are coming to the end of all the new stuff, because there isn't as much as there was before. So I think Dol Amroth is up next. So Dol Amroth have actually been given a fairly sizable amount of new units, although I will say that 3, certainly 2 of them are very, very familiar, as we'll see. This is the completely new unit they've been given, however, the Evelond Halberdiers. As I've said, halberds, very strong, if you can use them correctly. So the fact that Dol Amroth have one of these in addition to their pikes is a good move, especially in a siege situation where I think Dol Amroth will really shine with their good infantry. I feel as though, again, this fits into their quality sort of mantra. They're very good, but they're also quite expensive, so you need to be careful with your army composition not to have too much expensive stuff. So that's where all of this stuff comes in. Well, I guess this is the Belfalas Marines. They are essentially a Pelagir Marine unit that have been reskinned a little bit, made a little bit more elite as well. A Javelin unit. They're going to do very well as a Javelin unit, but again, perhaps not so good in melee, so you do need to protect them, but, Javelins are Javelins, there's not really much to say. And then moving on to these 2 units, where we have the Dol Amroth Sword Militia and the Dol Amroth Spear Militia, and they are essentially the Dale Swordsmen, well, the former Dale Swordsmen, and you can hear them say Ravanian Spears, because they were the Ravanian Gedrouts. So they have been taken away from Dale, which I believe is the reason why they have all of the new Dalian units to sort of make up for the fact they don't have these anymore. And they've been made Dol Amroth's lowest tier units, which is useful because Dol Amroth had no low tier before. Now that they do, however, they do have the option to have some cannon fodder, which some other factions, particularly the Elves, don't have, which is something that sets them apart. They're still very quality focused. These units are not going to win you the battle, but they will certainly give you a bit of extra padding, which, you know, you're going to need. Most of the time you can't just build an army based on just elite units. The elves sort of can, but even then it's a little bit ropey. So that is all of Dol Amroth's new stuff, and I believe that is all of the new units in the patch that I didn't go through before. Well, I was wrong. I don't believe I went through this unit before. I'm sure I'd remember it, but we have the Forest Wardens of the Woodland Realms. They are the former Forest Wardens are now called the Forest Bladesmen, and this is a spear variant of that, so they are essentially as low tier as it gets for the elves, although they are still, of course, more mid-tier than anything else. You know, again, spears are something that the elves can use to their advantage very well, because they are very strong. As long as they're in formation and pointing at the enemy, they will hold all day. And then you can use your archers to really put the pressure on the enemy. The Woodland Realms, I think, are certainly more of a quality outfit, perhaps, than anything else in the game at the moment, simply because all of their stuff is so expensive. I think they're going to be a difficult faction to play, but the potential rewards for mastering them are pretty high. So yeah, that is everything now. So that's all of the new stuff, and now I think we should speak about what's coming up next. So with regards to what to do next, I'm going to be going through the top 10s again, because everything has changed so much. The previous ones are basically useless now. However, because all of the balancing has been done, I think that the movement in terms of the relative power of things won't change all that much between now and the full 1.0 release. So I do feel comfortable in going through the top 10s again now, and hopefully them being the finalised versions. I might do a few revisions whenever patches come out, just to see if any new units, potential new units, are able to crack into those top 10s, but I won't redo them again like I'm going to do now. So yeah, we'll be looking through all of the stats in detail, because I know people do want me to sort of go through the stats, but I was reluctant to do that before because they were still subject to change. Now though, the changes are likely to be fairly minor, if anything, so we'll be going through that. I think we'll start off with the shock infantry again, because, you know, the shock infantry, everyone likes them. Nice big swords and axes, and also, for me, they're also fairly easy to test, honestly, because you only have to look at the damage and such, whereas with stuff that's meant to be based around more all-round, like the heavy infantry, you have to look at their survivability and such. So yes, I will be going through the top 10 shock infantry relatively soon. Hopefully I'll be able to get some battle replays out as well. So again, I don't really have a schedule for any of this, it's more just sort of a chaotic it will be when it will be. But I do hope to see you for that, and if you have any requests for me to do, then I'll be happy to take a look at them as well. I hope to see you for the next video.